You know, darling, she'd said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, as she carefully adjusted the cuff of her cashmere sweater, I really don't see the problem. It's just a small matter of. After all, what are family for? The words, innocuous on the surface, landed like a precisely aimed dart, burrowing deep into the already tender flesh of my exasperation. It was a Tuesday, the kind where the sky seemed to sigh perpetually, mirroring the weight I carried. My husband, bless his oblivious heart, was still at work, humming along to some podcast about artisanal cheese. Our 2 children, Leo and Chloe, were at my mother-in-law's for their weekly daycare session, a ritual we'd established to ease the financial strain of 2 young kids in our increasingly expensive town. I was elbows deep in dishwater, the suds clinging to my hands like a second skin, when the call came. It was her, my mother-in-law, Janet. She had that particular tone, a forced cheerfulness that always presaged a request, a demand, a renegotiation of unspoken rules. But this time, it was different. This time, the request was a pronouncement, an unassailable declaration that shifted the very foundations of our fragile equilibrium. My days had a rhythm, a predictable ebb and flow dictated by nap times, grocery runs, and the relentless pursuit of a balanced budget. Life with Leo, 7, and Chloe, 4, was a beautiful, chaotic mess, held together by love, caffeine, and a meticulous schedule. My husband, Mark, was a good man, a decent provider, but his optimism often bordered on naivete, particularly when it came to his family. Janet, his mother, was the matriarch, a woman of formidable will and an even more formidable sense of entitlement. She'd always been not just involved, but deeply entrenched. Her help with the children, initially framed as a loving grandmother's gesture, had slowly, insidiously, morphed into a cornerstone of our childcare arrangement. It saved us thousands a year, a lifeline that allowed me to work part-time from home and Mark to focus on climbing the corporate ladder. We'd never formalized it, never discussed a contract. It was just what Grandma did. It was a silent, unspoken agreement, built on perceived obligation and a healthy dose of guilt if we ever dared to question it. The arrangement was so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives that I rarely stopped to examine its true cost. The price was paid in small increments, the subtle criticisms disguised as helpful advice, the unsolicited opinions on our parenting, the casual disregard for our time and boundaries. I'd swallowed it, bit my tongue until it bled, telling myself it was worth it for the sake of family harmony, for the children's benefit. There was the time Leo had a nasty ear infection, requiring round-the-clock care and a week off work for whichever parent was designated. Janet had swooped in, declared I looked worn out and needed a break, and then proceeded to inform me, in no uncertain terms, that she was now in charge of all Leo's medicine administration, because he listens to me better. I'd felt a prickle of annoyance, but she'd already picked up Leo, cooing over him, and I'd let it go. The memory of her firmly redirecting me when I'd tried to administer his antibiotic dosage, her hand a physical barrier, still made my jaw clench. Or the Christmas she decided to buy the children their presents, insisting it was a special treat from Grandma. The gifts were lovely, but they were also strategically chosen to align with her own desired aesthetic for the children, subtly undermining our own choices. She'd even gone so far as to rewrap some of the gifts we'd meticulously selected, presenting them as if they were her own discoveries. Each instance was a small pebble added to a growing pile, a subtle erosion of my autonomy, a quiet chipping away at my parental authority. I'd learned to nod, to smile, to internalize the frustration, believing that passive acceptance was the price of peace. The air in Janet's kitchen was thick with the scent of lemon polish and yesterday's roast chicken. Sunlight, muted by the pristine lace curtains, cast geometric patterns on the polished oak table. Chloe, her face smeared with jam, was humming an off-key tune as she meticulously arranged her doll's tea set. Leo sat beside her, engrossed in a comic book, oblivious to the tension that had begun to hum beneath the surface of the pleasant domesticity. Janet, perched on the edge of her armchair, her spine unnaturally straight, had just delivered her pronouncement. She hadn't raised her voice. There was no dramatic outburst. It was delivered with the same calm, matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss the weather or the rising price of organic kale. So, she'd begun, her hands folded demurely in her lap, her eyes fixed on some unseen point on the wall, about the childcare. I've been thinking. It's really become quite a burden, don't you agree? My fork, midway to my mouth, froze. A burden? The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. I'd expected her to say something about wanting more time for herself, perhaps a holiday. Not this. And frankly, she continued, her gaze finally meeting mine, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, calculation? Triumph? In her eyes, I feel it's only fair that we formalize things. I'll need a contribution from you, of course. A significant one, to cover my time and expenses. Something akin to what you'd be paying a professional nanny. Perhaps £500 a week? The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's humming stopped. Leo looked up from his comic, his brow furrowed. The sunlight seemed to drain from the room, leaving behind a chilling pallor. £500 a week. For childcare that had, until this moment, been considered a generous family favor. My mind raced, trying to reconcile her words with the reality of our finances. £500 a week was more than half my part-time salary. It was more than we spent on groceries. It was a sum that would plunge us into immediate financial crisis. My chest tightened, a physical manifestation of the betrayal. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding payment, retroactively, for a service we believed was freely given. Her smug, slightly superior smile, the one that said I know best, and you'll do as I say, was the final nail in the coffin of my disbelief. The feeling wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, sharp dawning of realization. She had been using us, using our reliance on her generosity as leverage, waiting for the perfect moment to cash in. For the next few days, I moved through my life in a fog. I went through the motions, answering emails, wiping noses, preparing meals, but my mind was a battlefield. Janet had also delivered a parting shot as I left, a chillingly casual, and you understand, of course, that if you can't afford my services, I'll have to find other arrangements for the children. Perhaps my sister, Brenda, could take them on. Brenda. A woman known for her stern disapproval and her rigid adherence to scheduled activities. The implicit threat, the cold calculation behind it, solidified my resolve. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or cry or threaten. Instead, I began to meticulously gather information. I reread our mortgage agreement, scrutinizing every clause. I dug out the paperwork for the house I'd inherited from my own parents years ago, the one Janet had always referred to as my little nest egg. She'd always assumed it was jointly owned, a sentiment she'd expressed on several occasions, usually when discussing future financial planning. Mark, bless him, had never corrected her, never seen the need to clarify. I spent hours online, researching property law, joint tenancies, and beneficial interests. I contacted a solicitor, a quiet, unassuming woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, who listened patiently to my story. I didn't mention Janet by name, just referred to her as a family member with a vested interest. The solicitor's advice was clear and, to my surprise, surprisingly straightforward. The house was mine, unequivocally. The funds from its sale, however, had been pooled into a joint account with Mark when we bought our current home, a decision made for ease of access. But the provenance of the initial funds, the fact that they originated from my sole inheritance, was a crucial detail. It meant that a portion of the equity in our current home was, in fact, mine. And Janet, through her generous childcare arrangement, had unknowingly facilitated the circumstances that would allow me to reclaim it. The turning point wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, deliberate act. It was a Thursday evening, a week after Janet's ultimatum. Mark was at a client dinner. The children were asleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Janet had delivered her bombshell, a stack of documents laid out before me. The solicitor had prepared a formal document outlining my claim to a significant portion of the equity in our home, based on the initial inheritance funds. I'd also drafted a clear, concise letter to Janet, detailing the new terms of the childcare arrangement, should she wish to continue it, terms that involved a formal contract, a rigorous schedule, and a substantial hourly rate, far exceeding her original demand. I hadn't included her sister Brenda in the equation. This was about me, and my family, regaining control. I stood up and walked to the front door. I slid the newly drafted contract and the letter into a crisp manila envelope. Then, I walked to the small, discreet safe I kept hidden in the back of my linen closet. I opened it, revealing not jewels or cash, but a collection of important legal documents. I carefully placed the envelope inside, alongside the original deed to my inherited property and other key financial records. I closed the safe, the soft click echoing in the silent house. It wasn't a grand gesture. There was no dramatic music. It was simply the quiet, decisive closing of a chapter, the securing of my future. I didn't need to see Janet's face. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the moment she received the letter, the moment she realized the full extent of what I had done, her carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. The fallout was swift and spectacular, though not in the way Janet might have envisioned. Her initial text messages were a barrage of indignant exclamation marks and frantic demands for clarification. Then came the calls, escalating from concerned inquiries to outright accusations. She activated her network, her flying monkeys, as I'd come to think of them. Her sister Brenda, predictably, took her side, spreading whispers about my ungratefulness and coldness. Mark's parents, bless their well-meaning but easily swayed hearts, were confused, caught in the crossfire. Mark himself, initially bewildered, slowly began to understand the depth of his mother's entitlement and the precarious position she had placed us in. He was hurt, more by his mother's manipulation than by my actions, but he supported me, his quiet solidarity a balm. The financial repercussions for Janet were immediate. Her lifestyle, it turned out, was far more precarious than her outward appearances suggested. The contribution she'd expected was not a bonus, it was her primary income stream. Without it, her carefully curated existence began to fray at the edges. Social invitations dwindled. The whispers turned into gossip, then outright ostracization with a whisper. The social consequences were Janet's to navigate, her own creation. My part was done. The escape plan, meticulously crafted in the quiet corners of my mind, had been executed with precision. The years of free childcare, so casually exploited, had ultimately paved the way for my own liberation. And in the quiet aftermath, I found a strange, almost chilling, sense of peace.